Jason Allen here from Play It Software, and today we're going to look at the browser-based voice tracking feature in Play It Live. So here we are in Play It Live version 2.12. We've improved the remote voice tracking by allowing you to record voice tracks using any operating system with a Chrome-based web browser. Previously, you would record voice tracks using Play It Voice Track, a desktop application only available on Windows. However, browser-based voice tracking is now the recommended approach. If you're already using remote voice tracking in Play It Live or Play It Manager, there are a few configuration changes to make. And if you're new to remote voice tracking entirely, here's how you set it up. First, go to File and then click on Enable Remote Connections. This window has changed slightly since the previous version and simplified simply with a Start Server button and some advanced and external access options. First thing you need to do before starting the server is click on Advanced, and you want to make sure that the HTTPS option is ticked, as this is required for remote voice tracking via a web browser. So we'll tick this option. And another thing worth mentioning while we're here is that Play It Live will now automatically update a hostname so that you have a static address you can give to your remote presenters to access remote voice tracking. So by default, this is blank, but when you start the server, it will automatically assign this to a random hostname to get you started. If you want to use a custom playitradio.com address, you can click on this link and register your own custom address. Do bear in mind this is only available to paying customers of a premium module such as voice tracking. So I'll click on Start Server. You might be prompted for some administration privileges here to enable some Windows configuration. But when you click Start Server, it will assign this a hostname, and it will begin to download an SSL certificate which is required for the secure HTTPS access. And once this is downloaded and configured, this will go green, and it will tell you that your IP address has been published alongside of that hostname. This all might sound a little bit complicated, but it basically means you can enter this hostname into a web browser and have straight access to your Play It voice tracking. If I click on Help Me Set Up External Access, you will see we need to do a few things here to configure external access. First of all, you will see that we need to create a rule within the firewall to allow access to the remote voice tracking port, which by default is 25433. So to create this, simply click the Create Rule button, and you may need to click Yes on a prompt to allow your computer to make this change. Once this is done, the text will go green, and then you will need to set up port forwarding rules on your home or small office router, depending on what your setup is, and this will route the traffic that's coming into your network to the computer that's running the Play It voice tracking server. So in this example, I need to route 25433 to JSON Office. And I can do that possibly by clicking on the link provided, which is the default gateway to my router. Every router is different, unfortunately, so we're not able to provide specific instructions for port forwarding. However, there is a fantastic website called portforward.com who provide port forwarding instructions for pretty much every router on the market. If you set this up correctly, click on Try Again, and that will refresh and will give you a green tick if everything has been set up correctly. So once you're ready to go, take a note of the link at the bottom, and this is the address that you will need to give to your remote presenters to remote voice track. If this is the first time you've been using voice tracking, there are a few more steps you need to take. First of all, you need to set up a user who can then remote voice track with a username and password. And then you need to configure voice tracks within clocks and schedule those clocks so that we know where the voice tracks are going to go. To add a user, first close this window and go to Manage and Users. Then click on Add New. Here we enter a display name for the user, so I'm going to say Jason. A username, let's call it Jason again. And then generate them a password. So if you click Generate, it will give you a random password that you can give to the user. And make note of this. And at the bottom, we have a grid for remote voice tracking. Here you can select the hours that the user can remote voice track into. So for example, this user can voice track into the 7 o'clock hour, which we'll be demonstrating today. So I can click on the 7 o'clock, drag all the way down for the entire week, and press Y for yes, and press enter. This will highlight all the days for that hour with a yes. I can drag and drop any range of time and press yes, and press enter to confirm my changes within those voice tracking hours. When this user views the slots that they can voice track into, they will see any slots that they have access to, i.e. anything that has a green yes here, but it also needs to be an hour that has a voice tracking item in it. Now to do this, we need to set up clocks to tell Play It Live where the voice tracks are going to be. So I'm going to save this user and click on OK. And then I'm going to go to Manage and then Clocks. So here I have a clock called Voice Tracking Clock. If I double click on this, you will see that I have a clock full of items with track group of songs interleaved occasionally with voice track items. So here we have song, song, voice track, song, 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 voice track, etc. And this populates down throughout the hour. So your hour should look something like this. If you were to create this clock from scratch, you would go to Add New, and we'll call this Voice Tracking Clock 2. And you want to simply select Track Group under Type, select my track group of songs, and then I can press Ctrl D to duplicate this item, or I can press Ctrl C and Ctrl V to copy and paste. So I can add 3 songs here, and I can add a new item here, select Voice Track, and a placeholder of 30 seconds. I could then copy and paste this all the way down to duplicate the same pattern over and over. So this allows me to create a clock using copy and paste and duplicate, and create those voice track items. Closing that off, I'll keep using my previous voice tracking clock. And now I need to schedule that clock into the schedule. I can do this by going to Manage and Clock Schedule. And here I have all the clocks in my schedule. So I normally have automation on, but as the day progresses, I've decided to schedule some voice tracking clocks. So if I remove this, for example, you will see all my voice tracking clocks have been removed. If I click at the start of the week and select my voice tracking clock, here I can select how often the clock repeats. So I want to repeat this in the 9 o'clock hour, 11, 13, 15, 17, 19, 21, and 23, and repeat that daily. And then I'll click on OK. And you'll see the voice tracking clock repeats throughout the week. Now if Play It Live sees a voice tracking clock that is a clock containing at least one voice tracking item, it will offer that up to any user that has access to that slot when remote voice tracking. So now that we've set up the user and we've set up the clocks, we will now go to our remote voice tracking user, who might sound a little bit like me, to do some remote voice tracking from another machine. So here we are on the remote machine, and this is an Apple Mac. So here I've loaded Google Chrome onto this Apple Mac, and we can now start remote voice tracking from another machine. So I've gone to the remote URL provided by my station manager, and I have access to either remote management or remote voice tracking. So I'll click on remote voice tracking, and here I'll be asked for my username and password. So I'll type that in now. So once I've typed that in, I'll now be offered up the voice tracking slots that I'm allowed to access. So once again, the slots that are shown here are the ones that I have access to, and that they are ours that contain at least one voice tracking slot, either already scheduled into the playout log, or that are ready to be scheduled within clocks. So here I can select the slot that I want to voice track into, so I'm going to select the 7 PM slot. So once I select this, it will go off and download the work that needs to be done, and it will begin to download the audio for those tracks. As you can see, it shows a little downloading icon while the audio is being downloaded, but once that's complete, the download icon will disappear and will be ready to voice track. So on the left hand side here, you will see that we have the songs and the voice tracks that we need to complete. And on the right hand side, you'll see some session controls for switching to a different slot and ending the remote session, along with the update queue, which is the list of commands that are being sent to the server, and it will tell you that everything is running smoothly. It's worth remembering here to end your remote session when you are finished. There are a limited number of people that can voice track at the same time, depending on the number of users that you have purchased. So remember to end the remote session so that others can remote voice track if necessary. Going down the right hand side here, you'll see we also have Add Voice Track. This allows you to add additional voice tracks if you want to. We also have a track filter and track list, which will allow you to add tracks that are already on the Play It Live system if you want to include that track in your show. So to start voice tracking and record your microphone, first click on the record icon beside one of the voice tracks. When you do this, it will open the segue editor. This will allow you to record your voice track and then modify the segue or transition between the previous and next track. So I have a microphone plugged into this Mac. It is a Blue Yeti. So if you're using voice tracking for the first time and click on the record button, it'll prompt you to say, I want to use your microphone. So it's essential here that you click on Allow, otherwise you will not be able to record the voice track within remote voice tracking. Once you click Allow, it will then show the playback devices and the microphones that you can use within the web browser. So the playback device is the audio device that is used to playback audio within the segue editor. Typically this will be whatever you're hearing in your headphones. You do not want to choose an audio device that will be recorded as part of the microphone device. So if you have a mixer, you will need to make sure that you choose a playback device that is separate from your microphone and a microphone device that is isolated from the playback device. So in my case, the playback device is the headphone part of the Yeti microphone, and the microphone is the Yeti microphone itself. The addition time is the amount of time you will hear at the end of the previous track and the start of the next track. If you do change this number, you will need to click on Clear Audio Cache and refresh the browser. This just means it will go off and re-download more audio so that you can hear more audio within the segue editor. Now that we're ready, we'll click Save, and this will start recording my microphone. It's Ultravox and Vienna. It's just now on here on your favourite radio station. It's Play It 80s, and we're playing with the new browser-based voice tracking feature in Play It Live. And next up, we've got orchestral manoeuvres in the dark on Play It 80s. So after recording the voice track, you can move the voice track to a different point within the timeline. To move a voice track, click on the top bar where the title is and click and drag to your desired location. And to drag based on the next track, go to the other end of the voice track and move it relative to the next track. Once you're happy with the voice track, click on Next Voice, and it will prompt you to keep the changes or discard the changes. So if you're happy with them, click on yes, and it will move on to the next voice track within the R. If we quickly close the segue editor, you'll see that the update queue has been updated to show the updated segues of the 3 tracks within the segue editor, and uploaded the voice track within that segue. Jumping to my next voice track, you will notice on the right hand side there is a carts section. This allows us to include carts into the voice track. For example, you might want to play a bed or background music. To load some audio, click on the 3 dots, or you can drag and drop the audio straight into the carts. So if you click on the 3 dots and click on load file, you can then go and find the file on your system to load the audio. Now, when you're recording the audio, you can include this cart by clicking the play button while you're recording. So I'll click on the recording button now and start recording. It's Bruce Hornsby, and that's the way it is just now on here on your favourite radio station. And we got a bit of background music this time to play in our voice track edit. This one's called Climb at 30 because apparently we're climbing for 30 seconds. So this you can insert the voice track into, or the cart into your voice track, and you can control the volume using the slider with the mouse. One shortcut I didn't tell you about was the R key. That's the one between the E and the T on the keyboard, and that will advance to the next track. And this one's Erasure. So now we've recorded a few voice tracks into our segue editor, let's have a look at what else you can do in the web browser. So closing down the editor, if I want to drag and drop a voice track, I can do this by clicking on the voice track button and dragging this to where I want to insert it. This will then create a new voice track placeholder that I can record as normal. If I want to include a track that's not already in the log for that hour, I can select the track from the track list and drag and drop this as normal into the list on the left hand side. This will go off and download the audio as before, so when I click edit, it will go and load in that audio ready to record the voice track if necessary. I can also search my track list if I want to filter to a track of my choice, and I can filter the track groups to a track group from the drop down here. As I say, once you finish with your voice tracking session, click on End Remote Session. This will log you out and allow other voice trackers to remote voice track. So now that we've completed a few voice tracks in that hour, let's see what that looks like on Play It Live. So we're back on Play It Live now, and we've scrolled down to the 7 PM hour, and we can see that we have a few voice tracks recorded, one after Ultravox and before Orchestra Maneuvers in the Dark. And if I click on the record button here, we can see the voice track that was recorded into the R and trimmed down as necessary. So you can also see the other voice track that's here as well. That includes the bed that I had previously recorded. So those are the voice tracks that we recorded via the web browser, and they're now appearing here in Play It Live. Scrolling down, you can see the voice track placeholder items, which are in square brackets. Those are the ones we didn't record, and they're easy to spot with the square brackets. When it comes to the 7 PM hour and the system is in full automation, it will play out the voice tracks as part of the automation. Do note that if you want to play voice tracks in Play It Live, you will require the voice tracking module. You can find more information on playitsoftware.com/pricing. That's all I've got to show in the browser-based voice tracking in Play It Live. If you like this video, please click the like button below and leave your comments in the comments section below. And to keep up to date with the latest goings on at Play It Software, you can subscribe to us on YouTube and like us on Facebook. I've been Jason Allen from Play It Software.